Thanks very much, Marco. A motivation for staging this conference came from the experience of living and working in France as an artist and teaching in French art schools. It quickly became obvious to me that deeply embedded in the French vocabulary, connected to artistic practices, are a series of words that either do not strictly translate into English or are not commonly used in an Anglo-Saxon context. The most fundamental example of this is tableau. It does not strictly refer to painting, but is often used by artists in a very precise and conscious way, whereas in an Anglo-Saxon context, painting would most definitely be used in its place. In the context of painting, tableau in French is often not used casually. It is layered with nuance and has a history embedded within it that the category of painting in English, I would say, resists. In these terms, what underlies the use of tableau in French culture is submerged in a series of histories and a discursive apparatus. Its use in French, for the most part, is apparent and obvious. The migration of tableau into English throws into question what descriptions and understanding tableau generates, and the possibilities this has to transform the readings and the production of works of art. This was a starting point for this conference. However, and I have to point this out, its working title for some time was Tableau Apparatus Dispositif, or to be exact, Tableau Appareil Dispositif. Apparatus and dispositif have a more recent history. Apparatus arising from Louis Althusser's writing, dispositif from Michel Foucault's, and most recently, Giorgio Agamben has used both these terms in his work. In French art schools, exhibition texts and studios, one hears and reads these words repeatedly. This is especially the case with dispositif. It is invariably the choice of some of the more interesting French artists and is often used polemically in opposition to the use of installation as a description of a work. In many respects, apparatus and dispositif resemble tableau, and particularly as forms that somehow serve a heterogeneous structure. Thus, tableau, apparatus and dispositif are how today has been structured. This will unfold in the morning session addressing specifically the tableau with Jean-François Chevrier and Michael Fried's papers. The afternoon session addressing apparatus and dispositif, respectively in Philip Armstrong's and Claire Fontaine's papers, and returning to tableau at the end of the day in Michael Newman's paper. Day 2 of the conference, for which your tickets are valid, by the way, will be devoted to 6 research papers, which are a product of a wider process that really does need described in some detail here. A further motivation for this conference arose from a series of pedagogical questions. I'd say a pedagogical necessity. It arose from debates that took place in a research group called Paint Club, that is the network which allies all the departments across the University of the Arts London, where painting nominally takes place. These being Camberwell, Chelsea, Wimbledon and Central St Martin's, where I run the 2D pathway. Through the valuable interaction and events staged by Paint Club, I became convinced that questions of the tableau were essential to deploy pedagogically. This is much because my department is orientated towards a wider pictorial field, where painting takes place alongside or within a practice where photography, print media and collage are at work, and where the autographic is as important as the reprographic. In an English teaching context, it seemed to me that an understanding of the tableau form is essential. With Jane Lee, who is the Fine Art Programme Lead at Central St Martin's, we launched the Tableau project. Over the last 2 years, its activities so far have been 2 research seminars comprised of 9 papers. 6 of these papers have been further developed and will be presented tomorrow by Maura Darby, Adi Efal, Francis Gaube, Atsuhide Ito, Cédric Loire, and Andrea Majessi-Jones. The international aspects of these presentations is important to note, as well as the fact they're coming from doctoral, postdoc, practice-based PhD and artistic backgrounds. These papers will later be published in an edition of the Journal of Visual Art Practice. Also factored into this project was an extraordinary paper given by Steve Melville at Central St Martin's entitled Between Image and Medium, that he later developed in a paper given at the Royal Academy Schools entitled As in Nature. There was a hope that Steve would be here today, but his teaching commitments in the United States makes this not possible. At this point, I must point out that Steve Melville, Laura Lisbon and Philip Armstrong's As Painting project from 2001 is an essential reference for the Tableau project. The exhibition at the Wexner Centre in Ohio and the accompanying book, which for many has become an essential reference, covered the post-war work of artists fundamental to these questions. The book was also a work of translation, many key texts appearing in English for the first time. I'm thinking particularly here of Jacques Lecoin's notes on the work of François Rouen, the correspondence between Simon Rontaille and Georges Didier Huberman, and Christian Bonfoy's essay, The Objection that the Obscure Makes to Painting, that is in itself a key text that addresses the question of the tableau form. It must also be said that the texts in As Painting by Laura, Philip and Steve themselves have served as a major reference for this project. Thus, it's not by chance that Philip Armstrong will be speaking this afternoon and that Laura Lisbon, presently over here from the United States as a Fulbright Specialist Scholar at Central St Martin's, will be moderating sessions during the 2 days of this event. The final aspects of the tableau project that I must speak to took place last week. When I approached Jean-François Chevrier, asking him to be involved in today's event, he proposed to me a plan whereby he would develop what he would have to say at the Tate today through the means of a seminar he would give to students at Central St Martin's entitled The Tableau Form, Methodology and Composition. This he did with a group made up of BA, MA, MRes and PhD students. I would like to thank him publicly here, not only for a remarkable 3 days, but also for one of, if not the most lucid discussions about the tableau I've heard to date. As Jean-François often says, c'est très compliqué. And if the 2 days of the seminar devoted to the tableau form ever reach the page in English, I'm sure it will become a standard reference text on the subject. Over the years, Jean-François has published much on the tableau, in French and English, but the act of laying out these concepts and histories to an English-speaking audience highlighted the need to further consolidate and document his and others' thinking around these questions. So much of value occurs in migration and in translation. This event has many people I must thank here for their support. Firstly, the faculty and administration at Central St Martin's, Mark Dunhill, Anne Tallentire and Janet MacDonald, for their continuing support, and Janet particularly in terms of making Laura's Fulbright visit happen. My fellow BA Fine Art Pathway leaders, Stephen Carter, John Seth and Elizabeth Wright, need to be mentioned here because the project really does come out of the School of Art at Central St Martin's. I'm very grateful for their interest and support, and also being part of an extraordinary team. I would add to this my colleagues in 2D, and particularly Mario Rossi, who sadly cannot be here today, whose involvement with Paint Club has been so valuable. Many thanks also go to the Institut Français in London for their interest and sponsorship of this event, and particularly to Caroline Ferreira. I also need to thank the core members of Paint Club, Joe Bruton, Jeff Dennis, Rebecca Fulton, Derek Harris and Dan Sturgis. As I mentioned earlier, this has been a very valuable and enjoyable and a rare aspect of cross-college dialogue within UAL, and from within which the Tableau project arose. I'd also like to acknowledge Chris Smith for the Journal of Visual Arts support of the project in the form of the coming publication of the research papers from the second day. I've already acknowledged the As Painting team in the context of today, but there are other people whose work I feel it is important to acknowledge. Conversations with and readings of the text by the French art historian and critic Tristan Trémaux has been essential over the years. Similarly, the work of Lucien Massard from the Académie Royale des Beaux-Arts in Brussels has to be acknowledged, especially in his work associated with the journal La Pas de l'Oeil. Christian Bonfoy, Daniel Desers and François Rouen are also important. The dialogue that took place, particularly in the 1990s, with these French artists was of such value, possibly more, I think, than they realise. I would also like to thank the students at Central St Martin's. It's in the studio where tutor and student come together in the making and looking at art. It's a collective work, and I really do commend them for their engagement and their enthusiasm. Thanks also to the team at Tate Modern, Sandra Saikorova and Shinami Sakai, for amazing powers of organisation, but also to Marco Daniel. As he says, the project has been 2 years of planning, and his judgments and insights have been invaluable. Most importantly, I must thank Jane Lee. I do regard this project as much her conception. She's not only given pragmatic support and offered such valuable advice throughout all of its stages, she has also a clear understanding of what's at stake in the project. I'm glad to say she will be moderating tomorrow morning's session. And on to today's programme. I will introduce Philip Armstrong, Claire Fontaine, Michael Newman this afternoon. This morning we will hear papers from Michael Fried and Jean-François Chevrier. Michael Fried almost needs no introduction to many of you here. I know that for artists at least, his extraordinary essay Art and Objecthood from 1967 continues to be of such relevance. I would also number Shape as Form as another early key text of his, and yet another example of how terminology struggles in translation. Forme comme forme or forme bidimensionnelle comme forme doesn't seem to work, and it highlights what happens in migration. I seem to remember that the English title is How the Essay is Known in France. The application of theatricality, fundamental to his critique of minimalism in art and object, was again explored alongside absorption in his book Absorption and Theatricality, Painting and Beholder in the Age of Diderot. Subsequently, in Courbet's realism and Manet's modernism, questions of the tableau become important. However, in his book from 2008, Why Photography Matters as Art as Never Before, the tableau form assumed a crucial position. In the chapter, Jean-François Chevrier on the tableau form, Thomas Ruth, Andreas Gertzky, Luc Delahaye, he not only mobilizes the tableau form in the service and account of recent photography, but also interestingly speaks to the restitution of the tableau form that Jean-François Chevrier many years ago stated was what he considered the art of the 1960s and the 1970s was opposed to. I would just note here how this observation perhaps marks a shift in modes of spectatorship in terms of a notion of a public, and also how both our speakers have entered into commentaries about minimalism in connection with the tableau form. Michael Fried is the J.R. Herbert Boone Professor of Humanities and the History of Art at Johns Hopkins University. His most recent books are the already mentioned Why Photography Matters as Never Before, also The Moment of Caravaggio, and just recently published Four Honest Outlaws, Sala, Ray, Marioni, Gordon. I would also like to extend my thanks to Michael Fried for his participation in this event, and also to note that here that today was really sparked by the role of tableau in why photography matters as never before. His paper today is entitled About the Tableau. I've already spoken about Jean-François Chevrier. He's an art historian, critic, and exhibition curator. Many will know of his important involvement with Documenta 10. Since 1988, he has been a professor at the École Nationale Supérieure des Beaux-Arts in Paris, where his lectures and seminars are legendary among artists and art students alike. For 30 years, his main centres of interest have been the exchanges between art and literature in the 19th and 20th centuries, modern contemporary art, and the history of photography. Among his recent publications is his monograph on Jeff Wall, and seven volumes of collected writings are, or to be, published by L'Arachienne in Paris. For many years, the concept of the tableau form has played an important role in his thinking, to the extent that he can be credited with the development and application of it as a key in the understanding and the making of works of art today. His paper is entitled Inside the View, Tableau Form and Document. Laura Lisbon will be moderating the feedback at the end of this session. She is a painter, an associate professor in the Department of Art at the Ohio State University. Her work has been exhibited internationally, most recently at the Tannery and Gallery La Gare in France. In 2001, Laura co-curated as Painting, Division and Displacement, as already said, with Philip Armstrong and Steve Melville. She's the co-editor of the 2000 volume of Le Pas de l'Oeil on Peinture Pratique Théorique. At present, she is Fulbright Specialist Scholar at Central St. Martin's. And I'm doing my duties here. So I'd like to, first of all, welcome Michael Fried to the podium. Thank you.